Part 4, The Battle for Halma. Preparing for War. The news of Zoratha's atrocities spread like wildfire across Halma, igniting a fire of determination in its people. Stanley stood beside Ina on the command deck of her flagship, watching as the Halman fleet prepared for battle. Ships of all sizes filled the sky, their sleek designs gleaming under the light of Halma's twin suns. The air was thick with tension, but also a sense of unity. A leader's resolve. Ina turned to Stanley, her green eyes filled with determination. "This is it," she said. "The moment we've been preparing for," Stanley nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had come a long way from the grimy docks of Earth, but he knew this was where he was meant to be. "We'll stop Zorath," he said, his voice steady. "No matter what it takes." The enemy approaches. The first signs of Zoratha's fleet appeared on the horizon, a dark mass of ships that seemed to blot out the stars. Their designs were jagged and menacing, a stark contrast to the elegant Halman vessels. Stanley clenched his fists, his mind racing with strategies. "They're here," Commander Valen said, his voice grim. "Let's show them what Halma is made of." The battle begins. The two fleets clashed in a spectacular display of firepower. Energy beams lit up the sky, and explosions rocked the ships. Stanley worked tirelessly, using his knowledge of mechanics to keep the flagship running smoothly. He also coordinated with Dr. Aaron, who had developed a weapon capable of disrupting Zoratha's technology. A desperate plan. As the battle raged on, it became clear that Zoratha's forces were overwhelming. "We need to take out their command ship," Ina said, her voice urgent. "If we can disable it, the rest of the fleet will fall." Stanley nodded, his mind racing. "I'll lead a team to infiltrate it," he said. Ina hesitated, but she knew there was no other way. "Be careful," she said, her voice filled with emotion. The infiltration. Stanley, Lyra, and Nix boarded a small, stealthy shuttle and made their way to Zoratha's command ship. The journey was perilous, with enemy fire raining down around them. But Stanley's quick thinking and Nix's piloting skills got them through. Once inside, they fought their way to the ship's core, where Zorath was waiting. A confrontation with Zorath. Zorath was a towering figure, his dark armor pulsating with energy. "You dare challenge me?" he growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. Stanley stood his ground, his eyes locked on Zoratha's. "We're not afraid of you," he said, his voice steady. The battle that followed was intense, with Stanley and his team using every ounce of their strength and skill to take down the enemy leader. A costly victory. In the end, Stanley managed to disable Zoratha's armor using Dr. Aaron's weapon. With a final, powerful strike, Lyra brought Zorath to his knees. But the victory came at a cost. Nix was gravely injured, and the command ship was on the verge of collapse. "We need to get out of here," Stanley said, his voice urgent. The aftermath. Back on Halma, the mood was bittersweet. Zoratha's fleet had been defeated, but the cost had been high. Nix was recovering, but many others had not been so lucky. Stanley stood beside Ina on the command deck, watching as the Halman fleet returned home. "We did it," Ina said, her voice filled with pride. "But this is just the beginning." A new dawn. As the suns rose over Halma, Stanley felt a sense of hope. The battle had been hard-fought, but they had emerged victorious. And with Ina by his side, he knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. "We'll rebuild," he said, his voice filled with determination. "And we'll be stronger than ever." Part 2, The Trials of Halma. A new world. Stanley woke up to the unfamiliar hum of Halman engineering. The walls of Ina's ship thrummed with a soft, rhythmic energy, unlike the rattling and clanking of the maintenance bay he was used to. He turned his head and saw Ina lying beside him, her dark hair spilling across the satin-like sheets. Her smooth, midnight blue skin glowed faintly under the ambient lighting, and for the first time since he met her, she looked peaceful. The weight of decision. As the memories of the previous night flooded back, Stanley couldn't help but wonder what he'd gotten himself into. A princess wanted him, not just for one night, but for good. He had gone from fixing coolant leaks to standing in the personal quarters of a woman who had declared her love for him. It was overwhelming, but there was something about Ina that made him want to stay. The first trial. The next morning, Ina led Stanley to a grand hall filled with Halman officials. At the center stood Commander Valen, a tall, imposing figure with a scar running down the side of his face. "This is the human?" Valen asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. Ina nodded. "He is my chosen champion." Valen's eyes narrowed as he studied Stanley. "We shall see." A test of strength. The first trial was a test of physical strength. Stanley was led to a training arena where he faced off against Lyra, a fierce Halman warrior. Lyra was fast and agile, her movements a blur as she attacked with a staff. Stanley, relying on his quick reflexes and ingenuity, managed to hold his own. Though he didn't win, he earned Lyra's respect, and a few bruises. A test of wit. The second trial was a test of intelligence. Stanley was presented with a complex Halman machine that had been deliberately sabotaged. He had to repair it within a limited time frame. As he worked, he could feel the eyes of the Halman officials on him, judging his every move. But Stanley was in his element. He quickly identified the problem and fixed the machine, earning nods of approval from the crowd. A test of courage. The final trial was the most daunting. Stanley was taken to a simulation chamber where he faced a holographic representation of Zorith, a mysterious enemy from the void. The hologram was designed to test his courage and resolve. Though the battle was intense, Stanley stood his ground, using his wits and determination to overcome the simulation. The Champion's Oath. After the trials, Ina stood before the Halman Council and declared Stanley her official champion. The room erupted into applause, but Stanley could still feel the weight of their expectations. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore, he was a symbol of hope for the Halman people. A growing bond. That night, Stanley and Ina sat together in her quarters, reflecting on the day's events. "You did well," Ina said, her voice soft but proud. Stanley chuckled. "I just did what I had to do." Ina's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world seemed to fade away. "You are more than you realize, Stanley," she said. "And together, we will face whatever comes next." The shadow of the void. As they sat there, a message came through from Dr. Aaron, a brilliant Halman scientist. "We've detected unusual activity near the void," she said. "It seems Zorith is preparing for something big." Ina's expression hardened. "We must be ready." Stanley nodded, feeling the weight of his new role settle on his shoulders. Part 3, The Shadow of the Void. A gathering storm. The news of Zoritha's movements sent a ripple of tension through the Halman Council. Stanley sat beside Ina in the Grand Hall, listening as Commander Valen and Dr. Aaron presented their findings. Holographic images of the void flickered in the air, showing strange energy signatures and unidentified ships. "Zorith is amassing forces," Valen said, his voice grim. "We must prepare for war. The void's threat." Gar. Aaron stepped forward, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "Zoritha's technology is unlike anything we've encountered," she explained. "It's ancient, powerful, and unpredictable. If he succeeds in breaching our defenses, Halma will fall." Stanley felt a chill run down his spine. He had faced the holographic version of Zorith, but the real thing was a different beast entirely. A plan of action. Ina rose from her seat, her presence commanding the room's attention. "We will not wait for Zorith to strike," she declared. "We will take the fight to him." The council erupted into murmurs of agreement and dissent, but Ina's voice cut through the noise. "Stanley will lead a team to infiltrate Zoritha's base and gather intelligence. We need to know his plans if we are to stop him. The infiltration team. Stanley was surprised but didn't hesitate. I'll do it, he said, earning a nod of approval from Ina. The team consisted of Lyra, the fierce warrior from his trials, Dr. Aaron, whose knowledge of Zoratha's technology was invaluable, and Nyx, a rogue mercenary with a personal vendetta against Zorath. Nyx was a wild card, but his skills were undeniable. Into the void. The team set out in a sleek, stealth-equipped ship, heading toward the edge of the void. The journey was tense, with each member lost in their thoughts. Stanley couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore, he was a leader, and the fate of Halma rested on his shoulders. The enemy's lair. As they approached Zoratha's base, the ship's sensors picked up strange energy readings. This place is alive, Dr. Aaron muttered, her fingers flying over the controls. The base was a massive, organic-looking structure, pulsating with dark energy. It was unlike anything Stanley had ever seen. A dangerous descent. The team landed on a hidden platform and made their way inside. The corridors were dark and twisted, with walls that seemed to breathe. Nyx led the way, his sharp eyes scanning for traps. Stay close, he whispered. This place doesn't like visitors. A shocking discovery. Deep inside the base, they found a chamber filled with strange, pod-like structures. Inside each pod was a Halman, their bodies connected to the base by tendrils of dark energy. What is this? Lyra asked, her voice trembling with anger. Dr. Aaron examined one of the pods, her face pale. They're harvesting energy from our people, she said. Using them to power the base. A narrow escape. Before they could investigate further, alarms blared, and the base came to life. Zoratha's forces descended on them, forcing the team to fight their way out. Stanley used his ingenuity to disable the base's defenses, while Lyra and Nyx took down the enemy soldiers. Dr. Aaron gathered as much data as she could, her hands shaking with urgency. The return to Halma. The team barely made it back to the ship, their bodies battered but their spirits unbroken. As they flew away from the void, Stanley couldn't shake the image of the Halman prisoners from his mind. We have to stop Zorath, he said, his voice firm. No matter what it takes. A new resolve. Back on Halma, Ina listened to their report with a steely expression. We will free our people, she said, her voice filled with determination. And we will destroy Zorath. Stanley nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The shadow of the void loomed large, but he was ready to face it, with Ina by his side. Part 1, The Mechanic and the Princess. The unexpected visitor. Stanley was elbow-deep in the engine of a rickety old freighter when the commotion started. The buzz of the intercom startled him, and he nearly hit his head on the overhead panel. Stan, get out here. We've got royalty incoming, a voice crackled through the speaker. He wiped his grease-stained hands on his worn-out overalls and stepped out of the maintenance bay. A princess among the grease. The sight that greeted him was unlike anything he'd ever seen. A procession of tall, elegant figures in flowing robes moved gracefully through the grimy corridors of Dock 17. At the center was Princess Ina, her midnight blue skin glowing faintly under the harsh industrial lights. Her long, sleek black hair cascaded down her back, and her piercing green eyes scanned the room with an intensity that made Stanley feel like she was looking straight through him. The summons. Before he could process what was happening, one of INA's attendants, a sharp-featured man with silver tattoos across his temples, stepped forward. The princess requests your presence aboard her vessel, he said, his voice firm but polite. Stanley blinked, looking around as if expecting someone else to step forward. But the attendant's gaze didn't waver. A royal invitation. Sure, Stanley said, rubbing the back of his neck. The crew around him erupted into laughter and teasing remarks. Looks like Stan's got himself a royal admirer, one of them joked. Stanley smirked but couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a simple repair job. Aboard the Hellman ship. The next day, Stanley found himself standing at the base of Princess Ina's starship. Its sleek, ivory hull gleamed in the sunlight, a stark contrast to the rusted metal of Dock 17. He was led through pristine corridors filled with softly glowing panels and elegant archways. Everything was too clean, too quiet, nothing like the noisy, grease-covered docks he was used to. The princess's proposal. Finally, they reached a set of large doors that slid open silently, revealing Ina's quarters. She was waiting inside, her long hair loose over her shoulders and her green eyes locked onto him. "Stanley," she said, his name rolling off her tongue like a melody. "Do you know why you are here?" "Love at first sight." Stanley smirked. "That's what I was hoping you'd explain." Ina stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "I love you," she said, her voice unwavering. Stanley blinked, his brain struggling to process the words. "Wait, what?" "A new destiny." "I love you," she repeated. "From the moment I saw you," Stanley exhaled, shaking his head. This was beyond anything he'd ever experienced. "So, what happens now?" he asked. Ina's lips curved into a faint smile. "Now," she said, "you stay with me."